presenter, as I had mentioned, is Dr. Ed Bahaw, former student of the Department of Economics, and he completed his PhD at the UTT. And his paper is going to be on downstream natural gas plant portfolio selection, criteria in Trinidad and Tobago, net back gas price, efficiency, value added, and employment. So I'd like, okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Henry. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Special salutations to Mr. Martin Franklin, and special salutations to all students, undergraduate, secondary school, postgraduate, all students. My simple discussion here this afternoon focuses on the downstream natural gas sector within Trinidad and Tobago. To a large extent, it provides a historical overview, beginning with the inception of the industry in the 1960s. And with that historical overview, the main finding would be the lessons learned over the last 50 years. I would go straight to my, let me make sure I'm seeing. Okay, I guess I lost one of my main slides that was supposed to be there first. But I will simply use what I have here in the interest of time. A discussion of the downstream natural gas sector in Trinidad and Tobago cannot happen without a description of the upstream environment that enabled the downstream environment. And in the upstream environment, natural gas beginning dates back to the 1960s. In fact, the first major natural gas discovery was made in the year 1969. And following that first discovery of natural gas and not crude oil, there were many subsequent discoveries over the 70s, the 80s, 90s, even the first decade of the 21st century. You see, the second decade of the 21st century, which is what we're in right now, there has been no major discovery, and I'm sure you all are aware of that. When last have you heard about a major natural gas discovery? You hear about the Ryder Scott reports, which are saying reserves are declining, but you don't hear of any new discoveries. So what's taking place in the downstream is definitely influenced by that, what's taking place in the upstream. From the inception of natural gas investments in Trinidad and Tobago, which I mentioned occurred around the mid-1970s, what happened prior to that? Natural gas had no value in Trinidad and Tobago. Natural gas was produced in Trinidad and Tobago, and it was simply flared or vented. It was simply disposed. There was no money making, no monetization of natural gas pre-1970s. And even if it existed, it existed in a very limited extent. Government, around that time, mid-1970s, in fact, 1975, the government of Trinidad and Tobago formed the National Gas Company, NGC. And NGC was given a role to develop markets for natural gas, which I mentioned previously didn't exist. And these markets, let me go straight in the interest of time, to the list. This list here identifies exactly what government wanted to implement. And you would see the list includes expansions to electricity, that's power generation, expansions to ammonia, refining, and cement, and so on. Those things that existed in very limited capacities. And the government made a decision that they wanted to expand these sub-sectors. And the government also considered aluminum, iron and steel, methanol, and LNG. That was back in the mid-1970s. And one of the reasons, or some of the reasons, that were mentioned for the government selecting these sub-industries were the ability of these sectors to create employment, to generate economic value, and at the same time, to utilize natural gas in an efficient manner. The projects which were actually implemented included electricity expansion, iron and steel, production, ammonia, urea, methanol, and I have the years in which these investments took place. Notice LNG is not on the list for that period in question. LNG came later on, and subsequently in the 80s and 90s, there were adjustments to the natural gas subsector, where the state was required to divest its shareholdings in various plants, and private sector ownership was the overriding method by which expansions could take place. And this is when we would see further expansions to methanol, ammonia, and finally LNG. In terms of I'm going to go straight to my area chart. In terms of the relative importance of the various industries mentioned, I'm sure you're seeing that blue area, which is the largest area, and that blue area represents LNG. Trinidad and Tobago had decided to focus the utilization of natural gas towards production of liquefied natural gas, LNG for short. You would also see red and green there, which is ammonia and methanol. So the top three subsectors that were selected was LNG, ammonia, and methanol. I have a graph there showing, the prices of these of ammonia and methanol, and as mentioned earlier in an earlier session today, the prices of these two commodities, they move they move together. There's correlation that exists. Apart from price, I wanted to present some data in terms of utilization efficiency. The country chose LNG, ammonia, and methanol. Which of the three is the most efficient? And I have here some basic data presenting efficiency from the various trains. There are 4 LNG trains in Trinidad and Tobago. What we see from this chart is a pretty simple story. One train, or each train, has a different level of efficiency. And in an environment with declining natural gas production, you don't want to encourage an inefficient use of natural gas. You would like to maximize the value generated from natural gas production. And as a result, when you have a relatively inefficient user, you would not want to encourage that plant to continue in production. A hard decision, therefore, has to be made at some point in terms of allowing an inefficient plant to coincide with more efficient plants. I'm sure everybody gets the message. I'm calling for possible termination of an inefficient plant and encouragement of more efficient plants. A similar story exists with ammonia. Each bar represents one of the 11 ammonia plants that exist in Trinidad and Tobago. Remember, the government chose ammonia as one of the subsectors to pursue. And as you see from this collection of bars, some plants are less efficient than others. There are some which has much higher levels of efficiency, whereas there are others with much lower. In fact, there's probably a bar in there which is twice the height of another, implying that you might have a plant which is twice as efficient as another, operating in an environment where there is insufficient natural gas, and you're allowing both of them to continue in production. One of the reasons that could possibly account for such high level of dispersion in terms of efficiency is the different age or commissioning year of the respective plants. Some of these plants were actually commissioned, as you saw earlier in my slides, in the 80s, and others were commissioned in the 90s. So a difference of about 20 years. So that difference in age is impacting on efficiency. And again, a hard decision probably has to be made in an environment of declining natural gas production in terms of allowing inefficient plants to coexist with efficient ones. Methanol has a similar story. Of course, the industry which has the biggest disparity or dispersion rather was ammonia seen before. I don't have standard deviation measures to present, but I'm sure it's inferred by the size of the bars. So methanol, a similar picture applies where you have different levels of efficiency. So one of the main points I'm making here this afternoon is when you have such differing levels, varying levels of efficiency in terms of natural gas utilization, and natural gas utilization is supposed to generate economic value in the country, policies are needed to encourage efficient users and discourage inefficient users. All right. Right, good. Right. I also wanted to just talk very briefly on employment as a barometer of the performance of the downstream industries. And here you see all plants listed. And something I didn't mention before, L1 is not necessarily train 1. And M1 for methanol, they represent methanol plants, but not necessarily the order in which the plants were commissioned. Right? I'm keeping that confidential for now. But at the same time, a clear conclusion from this is that LNG provides the least employment. Now, these industries are not supposed to provide a large number of employment in the first place. They are capital-intensive industries. But the point is clear. Compared to ammonia and methanol, LNG employs much less. And which industry has the largest share in terms of gas utilization? It's LNG, despite the fact that it creates the least number of jobs. My last measure that I want to comment on in terms of measuring the performance of the various downstream companies is output value. What's the output value? You know, we measure GDP as a measure of income, of value being created in the country. So what this slide is showing is, for the various plants, LNG, ammonia, methanol, and so on, there's a large degree of dispersion in terms of the value being generated by respective plants. And again, in an environment of declining natural gas production, tough decisions are probably needed in terms of allowing inefficient or low-value plants to coexist with higher value, relatively higher value plants. What I also want to make a brief comment on is, apart from what the country has selected to pursue, LNG, ammonia, and methanol, the country could have selected other products, you know. I have a list of some other products here: ethylene, malic anhydride, malic acid for short, melamine, and so on. And the general picture, if you look in the end, there's methanol in the end. The general conclusion from this chart is that, you know, the other products that we didn't choose, they could have possibly provided about 5 times more value than the ones that we chose. So again, lessons learned from the history, from what actually took place, going forward in terms of allowing existing plants to continue in an environment of declining natural gas production. I just want to briefly talk about some possible recommendations. From my slide there on other products that has more value, those are more downstream products. In other words, the methanol ammonia that we produce could be subsequently further processed and produce these other products like melamine and so on, and the country could generate more value in that process. And I just want to mention that plant conversion versus new plants, the government could consider converting plants to these further downstream products, and the country could benefit. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.